Hi, second graders. This week we're reading fairy tales. Yesterday I read you a version of Cinderella that comes from China and is actually older than the version we're familiar with, and we compared it to Disney's Cinderella. Today I'm reading you a different Cinderella story. This one is called The Rough-Faced Girl, and it's actually a Native American Cinderella. We are going to be looking for the conflict of this story, the resolution, how it gets solved, and then we're going to try to identify themes and see if they're the same or different from the other Cinderellas that we've looked at so far. After we do this together, you are going to choose your own fairy tale and you are going to start to adapt it. You're going to choose the theme and the conflict and resolution that will stay the same, and then decide how can you put it in a different place to make it a different story that has the same theme. We're going to start by reading The Rough-Faced Girl. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible being. However, no one could see him, except his sister who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha, you're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And then they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. One conflict I'm seeing is the same conflict as our other Cinderella stories, which is the main character, in this case the rough-faced girl, is being mistreated by her family members. She doesn't have a stepmother this time though. She has a father and 2 sisters who are mistreating her. One day, these 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." Kind of like I said yesterday, the clothing that they wear to be dressed up is different depending on where they are. These are Native Americans, and so you know that they use buckskin to make clothes, and in order to make them beautiful they use beads and things that are different. From yesterday's story, she was using feathers to make something beautiful, so those things are a little bit different. "Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting. They look beautiful on the outside. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. Tell me, Have you seen the invisible being? Of course we've seen him, they insisted. Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh yes, anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being. All right, she said quietly. If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made out of? And suddenly her voice was as swift as lightning and as strong as thunder. His bow? They stammered in surprise. His, bow, we know. But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, what shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree. So they said, it's the great oak tree. No, said the sister of the invisible being. No. Oh, she saw how they lied. Tell me, she continued, if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made out of? We know, cried the two sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, what shall we say? Let's say it's the green willow branch. No, said the sister when she heard. No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home. Just test us fairly, they exclaimed. We've seen him. Just don't ask us all these silly questions. All right, said the sister of the invisible being. Come with me. And she took them back to the great wigwam and sat them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Though they heard breathing, the two sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide, all through the night they never saw a thing more. And in the morning they had to go home, ashamed. Conflict? Not for the main character necessarily, but no one can see the invisible being. Seems like a problem. The next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I am going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look I see his face. But her father sighed. Daughter, he said, I'm sorry. I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress, and as for moccasins, all I have left are my old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year, and they're much too big. But she said, whatever you can spare, I can use. So he gave her these things. Potential theme here. His other daughters demanded that he give them these things to make them beautiful. And they didn't seem grateful for them. And they ended up not being helpful. The rough-faced girl seems to be very humble and that she's willing to take whatever her father can give her. So we'll see how it pans out. Then she found dried reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cap, a dress, and leggings. Then, with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the bark pictures of the sun, the moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft. Then she molded them to her own feet, but they were still too big, and they went flap, 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 like duck's feet as she walked. Then all of the people came out of their wigwams. They pointed and stared. Look at that ugly girl, they laughed. Look at her strange clothes. Hey, 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 go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She didn't turn back. She just kept walking right through the village. And as she walked, she saw the great beauty of the earth and skies spreading before her. And truly she alone, of all in that village, saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. Do you see his face? At last she came to the lake shore, just as the sun was sinking behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman. When she looked at you, she didn't just see your face or your hair or your clothes. No, when she looked at you, she would look you right in the eyes, and she could see all the way down to your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, hard, cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once that though her skin was scarred and her hair was burnt and her clothes were strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," said the sister very gently now, "if you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said yes. "All right then," said his sister. "If you have seen him, tell me what's his bow made out of." And the rough-faced girl said, "His bow? Why, it is the great curve of a rainbow." "Ah!" exclaimed his sister in excitement. "Tell me," she asked, "if you've seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made out of?" And the rough-faced girl said, looking up into the sky, "The runner of his sled? Why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky." "Ah," cried his sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer. The entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "At last we have been found out." Then, smiling kindly, he added, "And oh, my sister, but she's beautiful." And his sister said yes. The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. "Now bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." And so the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake. Suddenly, all her scars vanished from her body. Her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful, but the invisible being and his sister had seen it from the start. Then at last the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married. They lived together in great gladness, and they were never parted. This might be my favorite of the Cinderella stories I've read to you. What was the resolution here? How did the problem get fixed? In one way, we said that the conflict was that she was mistreated by her sisters. And the resolution to that is that she marries the invisible being, and it seems like she's taken away from them. She doesn't have to deal with them anymore. Another conflict, or a resolution to that conflict, is that the sisters didn't get what they wanted. They were always mean to their sister, and then when they demanded what they wanted, which was to be married to the invisible being, they didn't get it. The rough-faced girl ended up being the one who got it. Another conflict, another problem that the story faced, or the main character faced, was that she had all these scars all over her from having to tend to the fire, and it ruined her hair and it made her skin scarred. And a resolution to that was when she met the invisible being, and they gave her the clothes to put on, and she bathed in the lake like she was told to. They all went away. In the end, her inner beauty, the parts of her that made her beautiful to start with, her courage and her kindness and patience, ended up showing on the outside. So that was a resolution to the story. What are some themes from this story? I would say that beauty comes from the inside, which is a theme that we saw in the other Cinderella stories. Cinderella is patient and kind, and that's what makes her beautiful. Today, what you're going to do is you're going to pick a fairy tale that you are fond of, a fairy tale that is maybe your favorite. It could be the one that you made the little foldable of the other day when I had you draw the conflict, resolution, and theme. It could be the same fairy tale, or it could be a different one if you want to try something different. What you're going to do is you're going to think of ways that you could change the fairy tale. Cinderella, Disney's Cinderella, Yashin, the Chinese version, the Rough-Faced Girl, the Native American version. These are all books that have similar characters and similar conflict resolution. Some of the same themes, but they're different, right? This one was different in that the clothes that she wore, the event that she was going to, there were details that were different, but the story was similar to this one. Again, same theme, same conflict resolution, different characters, different setting. So today you need to decide what fairy tale you're going to adapt, and then where are you going to put your fairy tale? What would the Cinderella story be like if instead of set in ancient China or North America a long time ago, what if Cinderella was set in New York City now? What would that be like? Where would Cinderella be going? What clothes would she be wearing? How could you tell that story in a different place? What if Cinderella lived in Charlottesville? What event would she be going to? What clothes would she be wearing? Who would the other characters be that were mistreating her? Today you're going to pick a fairy tale and put it in a new setting. I do not want you to do the full writing of it today. I just want you to get a piece of notebook paper. At the top, write the name of the title of the story that you're going to retell. I'm going to retell Cinderella. Then you need to write the theme. What is the theme that we've decided of this story? I'm going to say that beauty comes from within, and justice, because it seems like people get what they deserve in this story, both on the good end and the bad end. Then you're going to write the conflict. What's the conflict of the story that you're going to retell? The conflict of Cinderella is that she's mistreated by her family. And what's the resolution? It seems like in Cinderella, she usually ends up with a prince that takes her away from the situation that she's in. So that's what I'm going to write. There's a lot that comes in the middle, but there's a lot that you can change about the middle. As long as the conflict and resolution are the same, you can do whatever you want with the story. And then the last thing I want you to do today is some pre-writing, which is what you do before you write a story. So what is your setting going to be? I want you to write the setting. If you're going to set it in Charlottesville, if you're going to set it in New York City, you could set it at Disney World. You could set it on a camping trip. You could set it at a mall, wherever you want it to be. You're going to write the setting, and then I want you to start coming up with your characters. Who are your characters going to be? Who's your main character? In my example, who's my Cinderella going to be? Is her name going to be Cinderella? Probably not. I'm going to change it to fit my setting. Your page today should look like this. At the top, you'll write the name of your fairy tale, and then you'll write the theme, the conflict, what's the problem, the resolution, how does it get solved, and then these two things are going to be new. These things you're making up. This all is from the fairy tale that you're looking at. So if you're doing, for example, Little Red Riding Hood, your theme, conflict, and resolution are all from Little Red Riding Hood that you read. The setting and characters, you're going to make up new ones so that tomorrow you can start writing your version of the fairy tale. All right, let's get to it.